Moving to a new house was never something I had planned so soon, but the daily commute to my office had become unbearable. I spent hours stuck in traffic, drained before my work even began. That's when I decided to look for a house closer to my workplace. After weeks of searching, I finally found a place through a property dealer, a 2-story house in a quiet neighborhood. The price was reasonable, and the dealer assured me that the house had no past issues, though it had been vacant for a while. It was located in a peaceful residential society, the kind where people minded their own business. The streets were lined with old houses, some of them well kept, others looking abandoned. The dealer told me the previous owner had moved abroad, leaving the house unoccupied. Everything seemed perfect. On my first night, as I was shifting my furniture, I noticed something odd. The man living next door stood at his window watching me. His gaze was unbroken, almost unsettling. He never stepped out to offer help or even acknowledge my presence. I waved at him, trying to be polite, but he didn't respond. He just kept staring. Something about his posture felt off, but I brushed it aside. People could be strange, and I had more important things to do than worry about an unresponsive neighbor. The next day, I finished moving in and officially started my life in the new house. As soon as I arrived home after work, I decided to take a proper tour of the house. The layout was spacious: 2 bedrooms upstairs, a cozy living room, and a kitchen with outdated appliances. After exploring, I went to the kitchen to cook a simple meal, but realized I was missing some essentials. I locked all the doors, turned off every light, and headed out to the grocery store. Parked my car, grabbed some bread, eggs, and a few other things, then returned to my vehicle. As I pulled into the driveway, I noticed that the back door of my house was wide open. I knew for a fact that I had locked it before leaving. I stood there for a moment, staring at the open door, my mind racing with possibilities. Had I been careless, or was someone inside? Summoning my courage, I stepped in cautiously. The kitchen light was on. That was strange because I was certain I had turned off every single light before leaving. But nothing seemed out of place. No drawers open, no signs of forced entry, nothing missing, just an unlocked door and a single light on. I told myself it was exhaustion, that maybe I had forgotten to lock it. But deep down, I didn't believe that. Feeling on edge, I decided to go straight to my bedroom and lock myself in. I thought about calling the police, but hesitated. Nothing had actually been stolen or broken. I convinced myself it was just nerves from being in a new house alone. A hot shower seemed like the best way to relax. But as I entered the bathroom, I stopped dead in my tracks. The air was thick with steam, as if someone had just used it. The mirror was fogged, and the faint scent of shampoo lingered. I hadn't taken a bath since morning. Someone had been in my house. Someone had been inside while I was gone. Panic set in. I grabbed my phone and rushed outside, dialing the police. When they arrived, they searched every inch of the house. No signs of forced entry, no footprints, no hiding spots. They asked me if I had left a window open, but I hadn't. With nothing to go on, they left, telling me to call again if anything else happened. The next morning, I decided to visit my neighbor. I wanted to ask him if he had seen anything unusual. Maybe he had noticed someone entering my house. I picked up a small gift as a friendly gesture and walked over. As I reached the front door, the door was covered with an official notice. This house had been sealed for the past 7 years by the government. I took a step back, my mind struggling to make sense of it. That wasn't possible. I had seen a man inside this house just last night. He had been watching me. I had tried to talk to him, but according to the notice, no one had lived here for years. A sick realization settled over me. The man I had seen, he wasn't supposed to be there. And if he wasn't my neighbor, then who had been watching me from that window? Moving from Washington, D.C. to Texas was never part of my plan, but with the rising cost of living and a promising opportunity, I had no choice. As a truck driver, I spent most of my time on the road, and the idea of owning a large house in a quiet neighborhood at an unbelievably low price felt like a blessing. My wife Emily and our 10-year-old son Jake were skeptical at first, but when I showed them the pictures of the house, they agreed. It was a 2-story home with a spacious backyard, and the nearest school and grocery store were just a few blocks away. Everything seemed perfect. The property dealer was hesitant when I asked if I could visit the house before purchasing it, but he eventually sealed the deal over the phone. His reluctance made me uneasy, but I brushed it off, thinking he just wanted to make a quick sale. A week later, we packed our belongings and made the long drive to Texas, excited for a fresh start. The house looked exactly like the pictures, clean, well-maintained, and oddly untouched despite being vacant for months. The neighbors were friendly enough, though they seemed to avoid talking about the house. After settling in, Jake and I took a walk around the neighborhood. The streets were quiet and everything felt normal. We stopped by the grocery store, picked up a few essentials, and returned home. Emily was still organizing the kitchen when we got back. By nightfall, we were all exhausted and went straight to bed. At around 11 p.m., I woke up with a dry throat and decided to get some water. As I stepped into the hallway, I heard a loud bang from the kitchen. I made my way to the downstairs, then to the kitchen. There I saw the freezer door was wide open, and every single item inside was gone. I stood frozen, trying to make sense of it. I checked the locks on the doors and windows. Everything was secured. Confused, I went to Jake's room to check on him. He was sleeping soundly, undisturbed. Emily, too, was fast asleep. I locked our bedroom door before going back to bed, but I barely slept that night. In the morning, Emily noticed the locked door and asked about it. I told her what had happened, but when she checked the freezer, everything was back in place. I felt foolish. Maybe I had been half asleep, imagining things. Emily teased me about being paranoid, but I was very disturbed and confused. That night, I sat in the living room, using my laptop while Jake played in his room. The house was silent, except for the occasional hum of the air conditioner. Suddenly, a piercing scream came from Jake's room. Emily and I ran upstairs to find him curled up under his blanket, trembling. "Someone's in my bathroom," he whispered. I flicked on the bathroom light, but it was empty. The fear in his eyes made my goosebumps. We let him sleep in our room that night, hoping it was just a bad dream. I lay in bed with my son and trying to make him sleep and comfortable. Finally, he sleep, but I can't. Unable to sleep, I noticed the kitchen light turned on, then off. I grabbed a flashlight and stepped into the hallway. The air felt thick, and an unnatural stillness filled the house. As I reached the kitchen, I heard a creak from the backyard door. I turned my head just in time to see and saw a massive shadowy figure, nearly 8 feet tall, stepping outside the house from the backyard door slowly. Its movement was very unnatural, as if it knew I was watching. I stood frozen, unable to process what I was seeing. Then, in an instant, it disappeared beyond the backyard fence. I bolted the door and ran back to my room, locking it behind me. The next morning, I called the police. When they arrived, I explained everything that had happened. They checked the neighborhood's CCTV footage. The camera facing our backyard door showed something that made my stomach turn. The door had opened at the exact time I had seen it, but no one had stepped outside. The officers exchanged wary glances before telling me they couldn't do much. Could be a faulty lock, one of them suggested. But I knew it wasn't. Emily and I decided we needed a break from the house. We packed our bags and drove to my parents' home in a nearby town. We planned to stay only for a few days, but I knew deep down I didn't want to go back. I put the house up for sale immediately. Weeks passed, and not a single offer came through. Word had spread about what happened, and no one wanted to live there. The house, once a dream come true, had turned into something we couldn't escape. To this day, I don't know what happened in that house. There were no ghosts, no shadows lurking in the corners, just an unshakable feeling that something was watching us. Something that didn't want us there. I had been searching for a job in different cities, hoping to find the right opportunity. After weeks of effort, I finally secured an interview with a well-known company in this unfamiliar city. They asked me to stay for 5 days to complete a work assessment before making a final decision. Traveling back and forth to my hometown wasn't an option. It was too far, and the expenses would be unbearable. I first considered staying in a hotel, but the prices were absurdly high. Just when I was running out of options, I found an online listing for a short-term rental, completely free for 5 days. It seemed too good to be true, but I contacted the owner, who assured me it was available. The idea of staying alone in an unfamiliar house unsettled me a little, but the urgency of my situation left me no choice. The next morning, I picked up the keys, signed a basic agreement, and moved in, telling myself it was only for 5 days. The house was in a quiet neighborhood with well-maintained lawns and a peaceful atmosphere. It wasn't large but had everything I needed: furnished rooms, a working kitchen, and even a small backyard. I spent the first hour exploring the space, checking each room, and making sure everything was in place. The house felt strangely untouched, as if no one had lived there for a long time. Later, I stepped outside to get some fresh air and clear my mind before preparing coffee in the kitchen. As I stirred the steaming cup, I heard a faint sound of footsteps in the backyard. I turned off the stove and cautiously stepped outside to check, but the yard was empty. The silence was thick, almost unnatural, but I brushed it off as paranoia. It was a new place, and I was alone. My mind was probably playing tricks on me. I took my coffee and went to the backyard, hoping the morning air would help me relax. Just as I took my first sip, the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. Cautiously, I approached the front door and peered through the peephole. A man stood outside, dressed in work clothes. He introduced himself as a plumber, claiming that the house owner had sent him to fix a leaking washroom tap. I hesitated for a moment. Why would a repairman come so early in the morning? More importantly, he had no tools with him. Despite my doubts, I let him in, reasoning that the owner might have forgotten to inform me. He led the way to the bathroom and began inspecting the tap. After a few minutes, he asked for a glass of water. I stepped into the kitchen to fetch it, but when I returned, the bathroom was empty. The man had vanished. I ran to the front door and looked outside just in time to see a black car pulling away from the driveway. Something wasn't right. The house was locked from the inside. How had he left so quickly? I checked every room, but nothing seemed out of place. Trying to shake off the unease, I locked all doors and windows before heading back to my bedroom, telling myself I was overthinking things. As night fell, I tried to focus on reading, but my mind kept drifting back to the strange incident. Around 11 p.m., I finally decided to sleep. Just as I began to drift off, the doorbell rang again. My breath caught in my throat. I checked my phone. No messages, no missed calls. Who would visit this late? Gathering my courage, I slowly approached the door and opened it. No one was there. I stepped outside, scanning the quiet street. Not a soul in sight. Feeling uneasy, I locked the door and went back to my room, trying to calm myself. Just as I lay down, the doorbell rang again. This time I didn't rush to open it. I waited, straining my ears for any sound. The air in the house felt thick, making it hard to breathe. After a long silence, I decided to check one last time. When I opened the door, the street was empty, not a single movement in sight. As I turned back to my bedroom, my stomach dropped. Large, muddy footprints covered my bed. My pulse raced as I ran toward the back door, only to find it wide open, swaying slightly in the wind. My instinct screamed at me to leave. I grabbed my car keys and rushed toward my vehicle, locking myself inside. My hands trembled as I started the engine. Before driving away, I glanced back at the house. That was when I saw them. 3 figures stood by the bedroom window, staring directly at me. One of them was the so-called plumber. I had no time to think. I sped away, heading straight for the nearest police station. The officers took my report seriously and followed me back to the house within the hour. But when they searched the place, they found nothing. No signs of forced entry, no footprints, nothing out of the ordinary. The house was as I had left it, yet I knew what I had seen. One officer checked the rental listing I had used, but when he refreshed the page, it was gone, completely removed from the site. I never returned to that house. I canceled my job assessment and left the city the next morning, shaken to my core. To this day, I don't know who those men were or what they wanted. But one thing is certain, I was never meant to stay in that house. And had I stayed one more night, I might not have been able to leave at all.